because this is all about blockchains and because you are economist, I do want to learn you sometimes a bit more about some tech parts. This is one of those situations. So when you start building smart contracts, as you've seen in the previous clip of approximately an hour, is that you have different phases. That phase that you were witnessing is just the building of the contract itself. But of course, it's a way more structured approach. So we found one source that explained it or elaborated a bit more on it. But in short, there were 8 steps or so. First one up is very, very important. And otherwise, if you don't do this first one in the right way, you might end up doing it for the entire wrong reasons, or you are creating a smart contract that nobody would use, or you're creating for a use case that might not end up as you have preferred. So first one up is understand the use case of your smart contract. As you've seen with innovation already, fall in love with the problem and not the solution. So are you building for the right cause? And that cause could perfectly be gain value for myself in some way, if it's a more centralized approach or such. Never mind. Understand the use case. The reasons are all up to you, but at least understand why you're doing what you're doing. If you've covered that, of course, create your basic architecture, which means you can't just write the code, but you would need a certain flow chart. In other words, it's just create the decision tree. So if this happens, then that. If you, for example, bet Real Madrid versus Barcelona, schedule the multiple outcomes. What will happen if Barcelona wins? What will happen if Real Madrid wins? If it's a tie, if the match doesn't continue and such. Different outcomes, map them in an architecture, in a structure. So third one up is start development by using some tools, and that you've done already in the YouTube video, like Truffle is a famous example for Ethereum community and such. And I won't dive into those technical details because that's a bit too much for now. Let me speak. Test it, of course. So as soon as you've created your smart contract, test, iterate as much as possible. The same goes, of course, for many other topics, but if you created something, at least test it. And record, number 5, all the outcomes of your transaction or the transactions and the tests. So if you test it, if you test the decision tree, for example, and if you continuously let Barcelona win, let now Real Madrid win, makes it a tie, shoot at it from different angles and analyze what happens in the different situations. There are very famous examples of smart contracts that created a sort of betting structure, but where the outcome of a tie wasn't calculated. So as soon as it was a tie, so for example, if Barcelona would win, the money would go to A. If Real Madrid would win, the money would go to person B. But the smart contract didn't account for what would happen if it was a tie. So the money got stuck in the contract. Yeah, that's not a very valid route. That hasn't been tested, that hasn't been situated in many different scenarios. And here also kicks in the very multidisciplinary aspect, of course, because you do need to talk with other people as a developer. You need to have a very basic understanding, or a very detailed understanding, of the problem that you're tackling. You need to oversee the different scenarios. And this is where the possibility or the opportunities for you as a financial kick in. You might already have that overview of an entire process, for example. You know the different scenarios and the different possible outcomes. Or you are a field specialist in any other topic. But you oversee the entire. What we want to learn and why you need to know the basic elements of coding and such is that you need to be able to communicate that stuff, that overview, to a developer. A developer that knows perfectly how to write code but doesn't oversee the entire ecosystem or the entire process. So that's a multidisciplinary approach, and you increase your own personal value if you are able to communicate your desires and needs. And now you're also, most likely you fully understand by now that you need to be very specific when you're talking with an IT or with a developer, for example. So if you just sketch some scenarios, yeah, Barcelona will win, then the money goes to that, but you completely forget to mention that it might, the match might finish off early because of bad weather or a riot on the field or such. what will happen on the field, what will happen in the contract. If you haven't mentioned it to the developer and the developer has no idea about the business, well, you're screwed, in short. So after that, after recording all the transactions, you do need to do some final unit testing and such. Eventually, when you think your contract is up and running, let an extra pair of eyes check your contract. It can either be done by a third-party audit. There are specialists out there, other developers that will check your contract, or you could do it in a more open source environment where you offer a sort of a bounty, for example. So if you can manage to break my contract, if you can hack into my decentralized application, I will offer you $1,000 for a small bug, $100,000 for a big bug. And this is just common practice and happens a lot. So now you know a bit more about the smart contract lifecycle. I think for now it's too much tech, or it has been enough tech. Hopefully you expanded your mind a bit regarding the IT component, and let's go on to the next session.